Hello, CLA family, friends, colleagues, and community partners. Welcome back to our live stream. We sincerely hope that you are staying safe and healthy during this time. On June 16th and 17th, the SBA released new loan forgiveness applications and an IFR, much long-awaited application. Today, we have Jack and Rick here to help us understand some key takeaways from these new documents. In addition, we have Brendan Curvers to walk us through a specific example as it relates to your experience in the food and beverage industry and how you'll be impacted as a result of the PPP changes. It'll be a lot of fun, so make sure you stay and hear what he has to say. Welcome back, guys.
Hey, Jen.
We appreciate all your questions and interactions that have come through the inbox at livestream@claconnect.com. The questions are wonderful, and we are monitoring and responding to them daily. Please keep them coming through the session today, and we will address as many as we can when we're live with you on the show. We also would like to direct you to our COVID landing page at claconnect.com for up-to-date information about all these programs, tools, and ways to contact us for more specific consultation. Rick, I'd like to start with you today talking about the new Form EZ. I'm going to ask Nolan to show the form for a few seconds in case our viewers want to see it. What are the criteria, Rick, that an organization needs to meet in order to utilize this form?
Thanks, Jen. Definitely nice to see a couple of options and one that is much shorter than the original 11-page application out there now. In order to use the form, there are a few criteria that they give to borrowers. One of them is if you're self-employed, an independent contractor, or a sole proprietor, and you don't have employees, you can use that form. A couple of other criteria apply to really any borrower if you can certify certain factors. So one is any borrower who can say they didn't reduce wages of any employee by more than 25% compared to Q1 of 2020, and that borrower also didn't reduce FTEs between January 1st of 2020 and the end of the covered period. The third different category that would make you eligible for the EZ form is somewhat similar to that second one, where you certify you didn't reduce wages by more than 25%, but instead of having at least as many FTEs like number 2, you can certify that you were unable to operate during your covered period at the same level of business activity as before February 15th due to certain COVID-19 requirements or guidance that would have come out from HHS, CDC, or OSHA, and they give a time period for that guidance from March 1st to December 31st. And basically with that, you would need to prove by showing the requirements that were issued, along with some relevant financial records to show really the impact to your business activity.
Excellent. I'm sure we're going to start getting questions about what that means and if somebody actually is eligible to complete the form. So I think it's nice to just have it all laid out there like you did. So thank you for that. Jack, I'm going to turn to you because everybody's saying, you know what, this EZ form just isn't as easy as it seems. So could you maybe talk through why that's the case, please?
Yeah, as Rick mentioned, you can use the form if you meet the safe harbors, but in order to determine whether you meet the safe harbors, you still have to have all of that data. And the form itself is still requiring you to report the basic ways that you spent the PPP loan proceeds. So you still have to accumulate all the information related to payroll costs and interest on mortgages and rent and utilities. You have to have all the supporting documentation behind each one of those numbers. And then because you're basically saying you meet one of those safe harbors, you also have to have all of that documentation. And even though it's not, embedded in the form and you don't have a Schedule A and a worksheet like you do in the full application, you still have to have all of that and provide it to the bank so the bank can verify that you indeed do meet the criteria to use the EZ form. So this is really an easy form for the SBA, but it's not necessarily an easy form for the borrower as much as you'd like it to be, at least.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, with all of that, with the EZ form, we also got a new IFR. So Rick, another really important thing that happened with that is that we now have some clarity on the limits for both the 8-week and the 24-week covered period. So can we talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, Jen, that we were looking for guidance on the 24-week period, but definitely got some useful information for the 8-week period as well. So just talking through some of the key highlights that we took away from this, one relates to the cash compensation limits, that for the 8-week period, SBA already gave us, and the law itself already gave us a limit of 15,385, which is 100 grand prorated for an 8-week period. For the 24 weeks, SBA confirmed that borrowers can include up to $46,154 per employee for cash compensation. However, for owners working in the business, we do have a few additional restrictions to keep in mind, and this was laid out in a little bit more detail in this latest set of guidance. So for the 8-week period, owner compensation was also capped at $15,385, along with a few nuances in addition to the employee cash compensation. For the 24-week period, owners get the lower of $20,833, or the 2.5-month equivalent of their applicable compensation from 2019. So in other words, owners do not get the same $46,154 that employees get over that longer period of time. So that's one key takeaway when you're comparing owners to non-owner employees. Employee benefits for owners also include some further restrictions as well. If you're self-employed, if you're a general partner, or if you're an owner employee of an S Corp, you unfortunately don't get to include health insurance contributions because the SBA states those payments are already included in your compensation. Furthermore, for retirement, self-employed and general partners don't get to include those for the same reason, though that restriction for retirement doesn't apply to owner employees. Those owner employees can include retirement contributions on their behalf, but there is still a cap for them as well, which is 2.5 months worth of the 2019 contribution.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful too. And before we jump into some of these questions too, we do have one more key change that I'd like to have us talk through before we get to that. So Jack, can you talk us through the application of that new December 31st safe harbor date?
Yeah, so if you think back to the original application we had that had the 8-week period, there was a lot of information that had to be provided as of June 30th. And so the thought was that with the extension of the covered period now going out to December 31st, that most of the safe harbors would also be, that in a similar vein, now having to use December 31st, 2020 numbers, which obviously is going to be well after somebody that uses the 8-week period looks at from a covered period or even a 24-week period for those folks that got loans in April or May. And so that was a concern. And so fortunately, we got a little relief on that for both the safe harbors that are out there. And so now when you look at did you eliminate any reduction in wages or in headcount, you no longer have to wait till December 31st. It's as long as you eliminate that before you file the application, you can use that. You can say that you met that criteria and then provide information to support that. So it's kind of an earlier of December 31st or your application date. Additionally, the new safe harbor that was put in place, which deals, as Rick mentioned earlier, with your inability to return back to normal operations because of COVID-related restrictions. Originally, again, we thought that was going to be, you had to look all the way through December 31st. However, the application is actually very clear that all you have to do is look at your covered period. And so, for instance, you could use the 8-week covered period, be shy on your FTEs, but then if you said, well, during the covered period, I wasn't able to return to operations and my covered period is only 8 weeks or 24 weeks, then you could use that safe harbor to get away from any reductions caused by the FTE test. And so I think the flexibility that they've built into this application with the December 34th date or one of these earlier dates is going to help people out and allow them to avoid reductions because of those FTE and wage tests.
Yeah, I agree. I think that flexibility is going to be important and beneficial for the borrowers. So, as we look at this, it's all great information. We've got some questions coming in from the audience, so I'd really like to kind of pause in our more formal presentation about all this just to take a few of those. The first one came from Pat, and it was kind of a group of questions. And he introduces it by saying the 8-week program was clear on what had to be done to get loan forgiveness, but the update's unclear on spending amounts and timeframes and requirements. So one of his first questions is, does the number of utility and rent payments increase?
Yeah, so when you think about the original 8-week period and the 24-week period as well, that the same concept applies in terms of what types of things you would include in there. So it's not necessarily a limit on number of payments. Really, the way that the application and the IFR and forgiveness set it up is what payments did you make during that time period, whether it's 8 weeks or 24 weeks, and then what was incurred during that covered period and paid by the next regular billing date if we're talking about a non-payroll item. So that part really has stayed fairly consistent. We still do have some questions around, what limits might be out there in terms of payments. Can you prepay things far in advance or pay things well in arrears? But the basic structure they gave us is if it was paid during that covered period or incurred and paid by the next regular billing date, whether 8 or 24, it would be includable.
That's really helpful. And I'm going to ask one that you've already kind of covered, but I feel like it's worth underscoring. And the question is, can one use 12 weeks instead of 8 or 24 with 3 months of rent and utilities and $23,000 or so in wages?
Yeah, maybe let me take that one, Rick, if I could. So the application itself is pretty clear, right? It says either 8-week period or a 24-week period. But as we discussed on the webinar last week on Thursday, during testimony to the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneur Committee, Secretary Mnuchin seemed to allude to the fact that once you use your money, you might be able to apply for forgiveness, which seemed to indicate some flexibility that you might be able to use a period somewhere between 8 and 24 months. Now, the application itself doesn't seem to give you that flexibility, but we know there's going to be a significant number of FAQs and additional IFRs coming out. And so we are very hopeful that we do see that flexibility. In fact, one of the folks did send in an email that said they had heard on a recent SBA hosted webinar that there is the intention to introduce that flexibility of a period between 8 and 24 weeks. Well, we haven't seen that yet in the rules that are out. Hopefully that'll be something that we'll see soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to actually watch that webinar just to see what's being said there, because that would be great. The next question in this bundle from Pat is, if one prepays the 401k amounts, when does the full amount have to be deposited in each individual's account?
So there is a lot of guidance that doesn't get that in depth. What I would say is there's maybe a few questions that pop in my mind with something like that. But, one, that the basic structure they gave us, what do we know is, we know they've stated retirement benefits are an includable expense, and they've stated that if it wasn't paid or incurred within that period and paid by the next regular payroll date, it would be includable from a payroll perspective. That certainly would imply a lot of flexibility. We just don't know if they actually intended as much flexibility as that wording gives. So when you talk about prepaying things that'll be incurred in a future period, I think it introduces some unique elements, especially when it comes to payroll. Can you really pay something now that you're not actually giving or allowing an employee to have access to or not allocating to their funds? Maybe that would be within their definition. Maybe that's a little bit too much of a stretch. I tend to lean toward the latter, but again, really isn't any sort of guidance that gets into that level of detail of what a contribution to a retirement plan is.
Mm-hmm. And part of that might actually apply to what happens on the side of the retirement plan, right? Because I think for it to be deductible or includable in the eligible cost for forgiveness, the money has to be beyond the control of the company, right? So as long as the company makes the contribution into the 401k plan on behalf of the employee, then you get this whole thing of when does it get into the employee's account, but it's already gone from the employer at that point. And so now you're getting into administrative functions on the 401k side, which I'm not sure will actually impact eligibility or not of the amounts paid for forgiveness. So, but I'm with Rick, trying to prepay a bunch of expenses, particularly given that we've got the 24-week period now, really shouldn't be something that you would need to do.
Yeah, it seems like it might be a little disingenuous or create more problems than it's worth. Yeah. So the last question in Pat's packet that I'd like to hear you guys comment on, and I'm sure everybody else is interested, is what are the risks of moving from the original 8-week time frame to the new rules, if any?
Yeah, I think the risks are the unknown, right? I mean, ever since this program has started, we've been dealing with a moving set of rules. And, fortunately, in the loan application process, we did have an FAQ out there that basically said, when you applied, those were the rules that you had to apply under. And so we got some relief on that. And we saw that in the whole situation involving U.S.-based employees versus all employees on the affiliate side. They said, well, we saw how you could have read that one way. And so as a result of that, if you applied that way, it's okay. But going forward, you have to apply this way. We don't know if they would do the same thing in the forgiveness context. And, as we talked last week, I mean, there are people that would love to see a revenue test put in here that said if you really weren't impacted by COVID, maybe you shouldn't get forgiveness. We don't think that that's coming, right, based on, again, the testimony at that hearing. However, that might be a risk that's out there, because what if sentiment shifts on that? All of a sudden, we get out into the August timeframe and they implement something like that, and you haven't requested forgiveness yet because now you're in the 24-week time period. Would you be subject to that? But if you had submitted for forgiveness before that, maybe you would not have been subject to that. Those are things that we don't know, but that's where the risks come in, is the continuous shifting landscape of the rules around this program.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Question that came in from Linda that I know is one we keep hearing pretty frequently from others, so I'm going to toss it out. She says, we have a PPP. We also have a self-funded health plan. What calculation do I use to apply to the health insurance line item for the forgiveness process?
Yeah, so this one, we actually have some pretty specific information in the application itself for self-funded health plans that do state you would include your payments less any employee contributions that are coming in. So that's really the big thing that they're really trying to get to what the true net cost is to the employer, and not count things that the employees are contributing that would also be part of their gross comp. So sort of that double dipping type mindset. But there is some pretty specific information in the application itself that can help decide what to put in there.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. One that came in just now that Sam shared with me is there a percent owner that is considered an owner? So what if they are a 2% owner versus a 10 or 25% owner? Are they still the reduced amount?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because you think about it in the C Corp setting, where maybe you've got people that participate in a stock option plan that represents a form of ownership, or just you're giving an option pool or a profits interest pool to a number of employees, and they may have 0.1% of a profits interest in an LLC. We have not gotten any specific guidance as to what ownership constitutes yet. So are they going to draw the line at, like they did on the application, that you only have to report things in that line 9 for things that are 20% more owners? Or is the threshold going to be less? I mean, we don't know the answer to that yet. That would be one that we really would hope that you would get some more specific guidance on. The whole concept of the owner employee there's very little information about that, right? That was a relatively new concept that was introduced with the applications itself. And a lot of times when they are referring to it now, they're referring to it specifically as owner employees of S corporations. But as we know, C corporations could also have those owner employees. Are the rules going to be the same between those two or not? We really need some guidance from the Treasury on that particular piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of guidance, the utilities questions always come up. I promise I'm not going to ask you about fuel costs. I think we've beaten that one. Yeah. But there was a question of whether, speaking of guidance, if there had been any guidance or clarity on trash expenses.
No, that's definitely something that hasn't come out yet. A lot of the information that came out in this latest batch with the application and the new IFR dealt with some of those limits we talked about, dealt with how to apply some of the safe harbors and the time periods when we're talking about the 24 weeks, but really didn't get into some of those maybe more basic questions like we're talking about. What is a utility? What are the specific definitions within utilities and what's includable or excludable? So unfortunately, still a little bit of a wait and see with that.
Yeah, my guess is that we may not get more detailed guidance on some of these things that, in an 8-week period were very important because we were trying to jam as many costs as we could into that. But my guess is that, Congress is thinking, okay, we've given you 24 weeks now to spend something that was sized based on 10 weeks, right? You should be able to spend it, and we shouldn't need to get into all these nuanced discussions about, trash and, fuel and things like that, because payroll, which should be the bulk of that, now you've got an extended period of time to do that. And so I know that won't always be the case, and maybe we will get into some of these situations where even in 24 weeks, we're going to have a difficulty spending all of that. But hopefully, those subtle nuances become less problematic for folks if they are going to use the longer 24-week period.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question here, just asking you guys, how is inability to return defined? If construction projects have been put on hold by owners so that you cannot rehire the construction labor, is that an acceptable inability, or is it medical closures only?
We really don't have a ton more than what was in the law itself around that. The couple of pieces of information they do give us are the bodies or the agencies that would be issuing guidance that we are to pay attention to, that they list 3 specifically: HHS, CDC, and OSHA as sort of the 3 agencies that might give some of this guidance. They give a little bit of information on the types of situations and the timing, though really not that much. And the other thing that we did learn from the application itself, though, was the documentation to support that safe harbor. So one would be, copies of the notices themselves, the regulations issued or guidance issued that you're following that are impacting the organization. And the other, they do say financial records. So again, we don't exactly know what the thought process is there, but my 2 cents, and certainly interested in Jack's or others, would be that that's getting more towards revenue reductions or other things to say, what, our business was significantly impacted. We weren't able to return to operations. Financially we were down, and FTE wise we were down proportionately. And so that's why we think we meet this certification. But beyond that, we really don't have that much specific information.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, in the construction example, might actually have to do with why the owner has put the project on hold, right? I mean, if you've got 300 people on a job site and the current OSHA restrictions say you can't have more than 50 people gathering in a somewhat confined space, and the owner said, okay, well, our job site's too congested because of that, that's why we're shutting it down. You might be able to infer that, that was a COVID-related thing, as opposed to, somebody that was just shutting down the job because they wanted to conserve capital during this time. That you might have a little bit more difficulty there. But as Rick mentioned, I think part of this does get into, was your organization harmed economically? And if you could show a decline in revenue, during that period of time, supported by, some of these notices that either said you were not an essential business or something around your industry had some constrictions on it, it would seem to be that you would fall under that safe harbor then.
Excellent. We did get a clarifying question come in while we were scrolling through a few of these, and it's from Michael saying he was confused by the explanation when we were talking about retirement contributions. He said to him it sounded like we said we couldn't write off retirement contributions and then said we could write it off, so up to that 2.5 month limit. So could you guys just clarify where we are with that?
Oh, sure. I'd happy to take that one. That was my confusing remark in the first place.
Damn it, Rick.
Maybe just broadly, we'll put retirement in 3 categories. So retirement for employees, there really aren't restrictions around that other than the ones we'd have for any type of payroll costs, but they're not subject to the $100,000 cap as an employee because it's a non-cash benefit. There are restrictions, though, when it comes to owners, and those would fall into 2 more categories. So you don't get any retirement at all if you are a self-employed owner or a general partner actively working in a business. You don't get any contribution for retirement. You're subject to the other caps and nothing added on for retirement. You can still take retirement, though, if you're an owner-employee. And again, like Jack mentioned, we don't have much of a definition, though we know it definitely does include S Corp owners would be underneath that, and presumably C Corp owners too. They are allowed to take retirement contributions, but that's where the cap comes in of 2.5 months worth of the 2019 contribution. So that might not be super clear, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
It does. I think it clarifies it. I'm going to take 2 more questions and then we'll pivot to Brendan as promised. I know a lot of people have been staying tuned, listening to the 3 of us, just waiting for him. So Brendan, hang in there with me for just 2 more questions, please. The first is, would it be advantageous to use only the actual payroll costs if possible when requesting forgiveness, just to simplify the process? In other words, no health insurance, 401k contributions, et cetera, assuming you meet the FTE and other requirements.
Sure. I mean, the form itself actually has on there that you only have to include what you're asking for forgiveness for. And so if you use a 24-week period and you can use 100% of it through normal payroll and you don't have to worry about healthcare and other costs or rent, utilities, you can do that. You don't have to put any of those on the form. So that could actually simplify your life a little bit by just having to report one type of cost, the actual cash compensation of payroll costs, if you were going to maximize your forgiveness using that. So that's definitely an option moving forward.
Excellent. So my last question for the 2 of you is going to require you to pull out your crystal ball for me, just to do something really nice here and exciting at the end of your time. It says big banks are calling for blanket forgiveness of PPP loans under 150K. Are there any thoughts from you guys on whether this will go anywhere?
Rick, you want to go first?
He was just polishing his ball.
My hope is I don't know how much that one specifically will end up getting taken up, but I think in general we're seeing a little bit of easing when it comes to forgiveness. I think we're seeing pushing to say, if you qualified, if you met the criteria and you're generally trying to follow the rules when it comes to PPP in the spirit of the law, I think we're trying to see an easing of restrictions so that more people can qualify for full forgiveness or close to that. So whether that's the one that actually ends up moving forward and we get blanket forgiveness or something else, I think at least my sense is we seem to be moving in a positive direction when it comes to forgiveness.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you wonder how much a lot of these programs are going to interplay with each other. Right now, the Main Street Lending Program that we've talked so much about, there's not a lot of banks that have signed up for that one yet, and you need the banking network there. It would be interesting to see if there's going to be a little trading by Treasury here, right? Because if they put that $150,000 blanket limitation in place, that would eliminate, I think it was somewhere around 3.5 million loans that the banks wouldn't have to deal with when they were looking at forgiveness, right? that would save the banks a lot of time, aggravation, and everything. That might be a carrot that Treasury could use in order to induce more banks to participate in the Main Street lending program, which is something they want as well. So it'll be interesting to see what Secretary Mnuchin does in the horse trading there. It wouldn't surprise me if we do get a little more flexibility. I don't know if it's going to be all the way up to the 150, but definitely on the smaller side, say below 50. I'd be surprised if they don't institute something like that.
Yeah, that would be excellent to see, and I think you guys raised good points about it. So there will be more to come on that. Yep. So thank you both for all of this good information. I know there are probably hundreds more questions just flowing in as we're talking, so we'll do our best to get back to those and have you in for a little bit next week too, maybe to comment on some of those. But right now, I'd really like to welcome Brendan to the show to provide us a brief teaser on what we can expect on next week's live stream. Brendan comes to us from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he leads our manufacturing and distribution industry group for that office. He serves a variety of manufacturing and distribution companies, but he has a deep, deep passion and concentration of clients that are in the food and beverage industry and their distributors. So Brendan, welcome. Thank you for your patience with us. I'm wondering if you could please give us and the viewers a snapshot of what we can expect on Tuesday's live stream when you and I and Eric are back together to talk.
Definitely, Jen, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Jen. As Jen mentioned, my specialty focus area within CLA is food and beverage manufacturing and distribution. With all these recent changes that you've all been tuning into on a weekly basis to the PPP and the overall market landscape, we have been working up and down the food and beverage supply chain, ranging from agribusiness, food and beverage production and distribution, and ultimately retail, such as restaurants and grocery stores, to really help our clients navigate these uncertain times. Ultimately, each level of the supply chain has been impacted by the PPP, and each are navigating through these issues in very unique and diverse ways. So what does this all mean to you as an end consumer? It's a great question. And to help navigate that, next Tuesday, we will have Eric Bankin from our agribusiness team enlighten us on what to expect from the livestock and meat production markets.
We call him the King of Bacon, right?
Absolutely, also known as the Prince of Pork.
There you go.
So I will also be joining the live stream to discuss how the middle of the supply chain is handling the new normal. And ultimately, we will conclude with discussing what you, as a consumer, can expect when you go to the grocery store to pick up your food provisions for the 4th of July festivities that you all have planned. We would welcome any major questions between now and then prior to the show, and we will plan to build them into the agenda. To leave you with something to chew on over the weekend, here are some stats that CLA, grocery, and restaurant teams have put together. From a grocery perspective, here are some key grocery stats. In April, the price of groceries rose approximately 2.6%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, resulting in the biggest one-month increase in grocery prices since 1974. Even more alarming is the increase in egg prices, which I'm sure everyone has experienced. Those shot up about 16.1% on average nationwide. But even more eye-popping, in some areas of the country, the increases were even larger. For example, the price of ground beef in Dallas-Fort Worth area increased about 14.5%. In Los Angeles, the price of chicken breast skyrocketed by more than 26%. And the price of orange juice is almost up 15%, according to Nielsen data exclusively obtained by NBC News. From the restaurant perspective, here are some restaurant stats. After a near total shutdown of restaurants to slow the spread of COVID in late March and early April, nearly every state is open or partially open for these restaurant industry clients that we serve. However, according to the restaurant business, May 2020 sales were $25 billion short of 2019. However, this was an improvement from April 2020, where sales were $30 billion short from 2019, same month. Overall, the impacts you will see during the 4th of July weekend, either at the grocery store or at your favorite restaurants, could vary. And you could see significant price changes at these places that may be only a mere mile away from one another. We look forward to seeing you on next Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's kind of crazy to think about. And I know I'm excited to learn more from you on next Tuesday with Eric, and really appreciate just that brief introduction and some of that data that might even drive some consumer behavior this weekend. So thank you so much, Brendan, for that insight. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I really appreciate all three of you coming and sharing your knowledge and insight, especially, in interacting with all these questions that we're receiving from the audience. So to the audience, thank you so much for your engaged participation and question, and to our moderators feeding those to me. We'd like to remind you to please visit us at SaltLakeConnect.com on our COVID landing page, where you'll be able to find a lot more helpful resources, again, the forgiveness tool, other updates and information that we can provide, along with links to our live stream and other data. We also have our Contact Us button that you can reach out to us for more specific consultation. So thank you to everyone again. We hope you have a safe and happy weekend. We look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, so be well.